Hello, all my Be in Demand listeners. If you're a coach, a consultant, or a service provider, you are in the right place. This podcast is all about how to leverage speaking opportunities as your best form of marketing by positioning you as the expert, monetizing your expertise. What I always say, speaking is the fastest way to grow your business. Today, I have a special guest. As you may have heard on maybe some previous episodes, I attended PodFest on a whim last January. And the stuff that I learned at this conference changed my podcast. Not only did I add a second episode each week, but I also quadrupled my downloads, 4x. There are some other changes that I have made, and it's all a result of what I learned at PodFest. Well, I'm bringing on the managing partner of PodFest, Nick Pavlidis. And he has a very interesting career that started off in the legal industry as a lawyer, moved his way into writing and ghostwriting. So he has so much to share with us as a lifelong entrepreneur. Nick, thank you and welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
God, we have so much to talk about, and it's so little time to actually do all the talking. So can you just give everybody like a high level, who is Nick and how did you get here? Because I know a little bit about your past, which is fascinating. So take it away.
Sure. Well, I started out professionally as a lawyer for 13 years. Got super stressed with that. I was working at a large law firm in New York City, corner office, overlooking Central Park, all the fancy stuff that one might want when they go to law school. But it started pulling on the life, and there became a point where and I don't say this to exaggerate, but I essentially had to pick between my family and my legal career. And so I flipped the coin. I'm just kidding. I didn't. And so I decided that I was going to quit the practice of law and try and figure out something different, where the biggest frustration I had was that I didn't set good boundaries there. So I was basically working a lot. But substantively, from a day-to-day basis, really frustrated me that in order for me to win, someone else had to lose. I was a corporate litigator, and there was no everyone wins. It was either one person wins or nobody wins when there's a settlement that no one's happy with. So eventually I was looking around for some things to do, and eventually I found ghostwriting. So I started ghostwriting books for people, and I've since written more than 100 books. I've had a whole bunch of really cool books translated into a couple dozen languages, 20 something languages, including Greek, which finally got my dad to acknowledge that writing is a thing. And then on top of that, I started teaching other people how to something profitable and predictable. Then I started really getting excited about being able to impact these people's lives, these experts, these people who had a message in their heart or a method in their head. And I started looking for different ways to do that. And so I went out and started investing in some companies with my ghostwriting revenue, eventually getting into purchasing a publishing company, and ultimately in 2024, investing in and becoming the managing partner of basically the largest, depending on how you math, but a large conference in the podcasting multimedia authorship space called PodFest.
Yes, PodFest.
Yes.
I went to PodFest this past January, the last time they held it, and it was just on a whim. A friend sent me an email, said, hey, want to go to this? I was like, sure. I've had a podcast for 3 years. Why not? And yeah, drastically changed the way I podcast
I love
today.
You shared that privately with me, about how it impacted your downloads. I mean, that's really what I seek out to do. And I've shared with you my 1-sentence business plan that if I help enough people become successful, I never have to worry about my own success. And so what does that mean in the podcasting world? How you shared the impact of being there. And obviously just being there didn't do it. You needed to implement, which you did. So when you shared that with me, that's what gets me fired up about PodFest.
Are you ready to leverage speaking as your best form of marketing? There are over 7,500 events looking for speakers every single day. Speaking positions you as the expert in the room, but you probably don't know where to start. So I created this great resource called the Directory of Places to Speak. This resource will help you get started today. So head on over to speakandstandout.com/directory to grab your free copy now. Don't miss this opportunity to be the expert speaking to audiences filled with your ideal clients. And for everybody who's listening, what I said to him, because I had the pleasure of meeting Nick at a local New England chapter of PodFest, that we were meeting. We meet once a month, and I had just recently joined them. And I just happened to be gathered around Nick, and there were a few other people. And I said, if you are on the fence about going to PodFest, what I learned, I quadrupled my downloads and was able to even add a second episode a week with so much ease. And so it has drastically changed the way that I look at my podcast. I'm, my goal now is that my podcast is the center of my content universe, second to, stages. Yes.
Well, that's important because I like to tell people, when they ask what is PodFest or why should I go to PodFest? My goal with PodFest is to make it so everything you need to become successful is within those four walls. And there are lots of rooms there. We have breakout sections. We'll talk a little bit. We have more than 100 speakers. And so there's lots of information there. But between information, the relationships you're going to build, the brands that are there, and the tools and resources that the brands represent or the speakers talk about, it just becomes a treasure hunt almost, a little scavenger hunt to leave having met the right people, go into the right sessions, which is easy to do because you have the agenda, and look for the tools that can help you achieve your goals. And so I love that you found that map. You created your own treasure map and left with not just that quadruple downloads, but the ability to do more without having to double your effort.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm able to impact more people, not just locally, but literally globally. I get notifications about where I am on the charts in certain countries. And it just makes my heart sing that there are people around the globe who want to learn more about public speaking and they're listening to my podcast. It's just a phenomenal stage,
amazing,
as I like to put it. But you had your own podcast. Because your whole history is law, then into writing, and then you became this managing partner, but you've been involved in podcasting for a long time.
Yes, I've had 4 podcasts. 2, I'm not too focused on reviving, so to speak. 1 is about writing, and I have recorded some episodes and we'll start to release them after PodFest 2025. Basically helping writers become ghostwriters. I strongly believe that as a mentor of mine used to say, that we can find or create work that is meaningful, purposeful, and profitable. And there are a lot of writers who don't believe that's the case. And I'm looking to make sure I give them the path and direction and encouragement to take action in a structured way. But then I think the one that you may be mentioning is the one where in 2014, my children and I started a podcast together, where it's a personal growth and leadership podcast for kids. We've had 260 something episodes. We haven't recorded in a while, partially because I wanted to keep it pure between me and my kids, where it's not something that they see as a chore, but something they see as a positive experience with me. And so we've been in Parents Magazine, moms.com, board teachers, I don't check the downloads, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands for sure. And we've just had some incredible opportunities. And in fact, a lot of people, how you talk about your podcast being almost the center of your content, what's cool about podcasting to me is that this parenting podcast or leadership or personal growth podcast for kids has opened the doors to so many business opportunities for me that it's hard to count. Just off the top of my head, I've had ghostwriting clients who hire me because they love 5 Minutes with Dad as the podcast. In fact, PodFest, the opportunity would not have come about if not for 5 Minutes with Dad, because that's what integrated me into the community to build the relationship where Chris Krimitsos, the founder of PodFest, made one phone call and said, listen, I have a lot of great friends and everything like that, but I love your heart for podcasting. And if you're interested in joining, let's just talk numbers. Let's talk deal structure. And it was a real easy negotiation because we built that relationship. So you don't necessarily need a business podcast to have it impact you from a business perspective.
I think that's an important thing for people to hear, that it doesn't have to be a business podcast.
Yeah.
But I would love for you just to, I know you said, like so many opportunities, but if you could just share some of those besides, becoming a member of, a managing partner of PodFest, like what other opportunities came because of your non-business podcast?
I've had a lot of speaking opportunities. So I've had at least one ghostwriting client, if not more. I've had, from 5 Minutes with Dad alone, I have had other parents in town invite me to co-coach sports teams. Geez, off the top of my head, I've generated some income from it, not from sponsorships. I'm not anti-sponsorship. It's just we had decent amount of downloads, but for me, I'd rather just do affiliate marketing. It's simple. So I've been able to make some impact there. But I will tell you that the number one impact that this had on me was on my children. Like, we've had episodes where it's giving, saving, spending, and investing. I teach them what to do with every dollar that comes in, and I would pay them for their podcast appearances, and they would immediately divide it into their 4 piggy banks and then save up their money. And we would get to go give together with my daughter. And so this is somewhat indirect from the podcast, but the good energy that we created from that giving brought me an opportunity. Now I am the executive director of a not-for-profit here in Massachusetts. And so it's almost hard to track back all of the opportunities, but I can go far enough where it's, we zigged and zagged a little bit, but this is 4 steps removed from the step that started with the podcast. So local opportunities from a podcast, business opportunities, direct business hiring from ghostwriting, having the opportunity to get involved in PodFest, getting on multiple stages, and getting as a I don't want to say sought after, but outreach to me to be a podcast guest on other podcasts, even outside of the kids and family world. There's a lot of business podcasts that I've been on where someone reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you about how you get your kids involved in something like a business, something like a podcast." So I've been on some podcasts there. So yeah, it's been pretty cool.
Of course you have, which is exactly why I reached out to you. And again, it was like, it's building those relationships, which is what I say, like the speaking world is all about relationships. It's, when I get asked, well, how do I get on more stages? I'm like, start reaching out to people, build relationships with speakers and also the people that book you. It's lovely.
Yeah, I have I mentioned earlier, I help other people get into ghostwriting. So I have a program called Ghostwriter School. And I teach my students, hey, the good thing about ghostwriting is you don't need to sell 1,000 hamburgers a day to make money. You sell a handful of projects over the course of the year and you'll be fine. And so how do you get business? Well, you need to build relationships with 3 different types of people to bring business in: your prospects, your influencers, and those are people your prospects pay attention to, and gatekeepers, people your prospects already serve in a different way. So how do you build relationships with them? The truth is, it doesn't really matter. And so we have one student who has her own podcast. And again, this is not about writing. It's not about business. Her podcast is called the Life and Mission Podcast. And it's lifeandmission.com if anyone wants to check her out. It's Kay Helm. She gets ghostwriting clients by the conversations before and after the interviews with her guests. And she doesn't do it manipulatively. She talks about storytelling for fundraising. She talks about her own writing. She talks about spirituality, her faith. She talks about a whole lot of different things, but it's not a writing podcast. And just the guests that she attracts, when they have their small talk, "Hey, I'm a ghostwriter and I do this and this." People are like, "Ghostwriter, you know what? I've been thinking about writing a book." And it just happens. And so you create your own stage, you invite people in, you serve them well, and those magical speaking opportunities, writing opportunities, et cetera, they just come about. And it's funny because ghostwriter students will be like, "Hey, out of nowhere, I got a ghostwriting client." And I'm like, "No, it's not out of nowhere. You've been putting in the work, but you've integrated it into something you're so passionate and natural at, this podcast or that, speaking engagement or local networking thing that you just enjoy doing, that you don't even realize you're working."
That's right. You don't even realize you're working. So here's a great question that I want to ask you, since we're talking about like some of your past clients who have podcasts and it has nothing to do with what they actually do. Why do you think podcasting is so powerful?
I'd say a couple of reasons. Number one, if I ask experts, coaches, consultants, hey, if I could get you on a stage halfway across the country and it'd be 200 ideal prospects, would you fly out there on your own dime, speak for 45 minutes and give people, follow up or call to action, hire you to support them deeper? I can't imagine like the percentage who would say yes. Absolutely. You're not just going to speak at a company. If Microsoft called and said, hey, I want you to speak about leadership. No, that's a paid gig. That's how that works. But if I could get you with the chief technology officers from 50 different companies and you could talk about tech integration or whatever, or incorporating AI into traditional tech stacks, would you fly out there for an audience of prospects? Yes, they would. That's more their own promotion. And podcasting allows us to build that audience and have them come to us virtually. And there's this intimacy, whether it's video and they get to see you and build a relationship with you, or audio where you're in their head and you're in both ears. It's really hard to get better than that. And then a friend of mine calls this, if you can become one screen worthy, where you're providing so much value to the right people that they're only looking at that one screen, or they're only listening. They're not listening while looking at their phone or something like that, then you really build a deep relationship with them. And you build trust by being consistent. Hey, every Friday, I know Nick's going to show up and talk about this. And it allows you to not just give people information, but it also allows you to give them inspiration, because you can share stories of other people just like them succeeding in a way they want. In the book writing world and really in the content world, I tell people, good books or good content makes people competent. It gives people information. Here are 10 ways to find speaking engagement, or 5 ways to increase your fees. That's helpful, but that's good content. Great content goes a step beyond that, and it builds confidence and inspiration. And confidence comes from making something simple, especially something complex, simple. And that might be, there's only 3 things you need to do to achieve this goal. Oh, I can do 3 things. Inspiration comes from seeing people just like them achieving the goal. So if you tell a story about how Kay Helm had this Life and Mission podcast, and just through regular conversations, she found 4 ghostwriting clients a year. Her ghostwriting fee is $25,000 or $50,000, whatever it is. Then people in their head start doing math and say, wow, if I had 4 $2,500, that's $100,000 from ghostwriting. If Kay can do it, why can't I do it? And so the podcast world, by releasing regular episodes, it allows you to check all these boxes and build a relationship and develop that intimacy and build not just information, but provide inspiration. And then also use that podcast and the small or large audience that you've built to invite people and build relationships so you're using your podcast as a networking tool to build relationships that'll help you become successful. It's just there's so many ways, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, that the podcast world, being actively involved in podcasting, can benefit really anybody, no matter whether it's a personal goal or a business goal.
Yes. And one of the things that I love about it is it's 24/7, 365 days. I mean, if there's a holiday here in the US, there are people on the other side of the globe, like it's not a holiday there. It's a normal work day, and they're on their way to work or wherever it is that they listen to podcasts. So that podcast, your episodes are constantly working for you.
Yes. Yeah, 100%.
So what do you think the future of podcasting is?
Well, yeah, I'm not tremendously into the political world, but I think if there was one thing that we learned in the election cycle, is that more people are open to finding information through podcasting, through videos, by turning off the TV. The statistics that we saw, that we've seen afterwards, where people try to say, like, how are so many people crediting podcasts with so much attention? And there was something to the effect of 80% of people below age 25 are no longer watching TV, like any TV. Like,
wow.
And everything. And I do believe even the TV world, it started with TiVo and now the DVRs, where people are just so accustomed to everything being on demand, that the way that they consume information now, they don't worry, oh, Thursday at 8:00, I need to be here to watch that show. And so podcasting has almost been, it's benefited from streaming services because people are used to watching their old school entertainment in a more on-demand way. It's benefited from TiVo DVRs where it's, okay, I'm just going to come back to this. I don't necessarily have to be somewhere live. I'll watch whatever I want. And the whole idea where Netflix is searchable. I mean, that's what Apple Podcasts is. That's what YouTube is. It's all searchable. So it plugs into everything. And then I think at the end of the day, whether it's video or audio, because the phones follow people around, the easiest type of content to consume is something they can search and carry around on their phone, audio podcasts or even some video podcasts. So there's a lot of, I'd love to credit the podcasting world with revolutionizing how people consume content. But the truth is it's benefited from a momentum that's being built in different ways to consume video, TV, traditional media. And I just think people are more open to giving non-traditional TV producers, news providers a chance.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I feel like it does put the listener, the audience, in the driver's seat. It's like, here's my episode that's available to you, and they get to listen to it, consume it however they want, and reconsume it.
Especially with independent podcasters, there's always been one big barrier in the entertainment world that the creators are unwilling to take down, and that's the personal relationship. Where if you like watching Seinfeld or whatever, you can't just go find Jerry Seinfeld somewhere. Every once in a while he'll do a tour, but you sit in a big auditorium or whatever. But with independent content creators, they often are just one, Facebook post or Instagram direct message away. You can they feel a lot more accessible. And so the relationship side of things, I think that's the other momentum from social media where you can follow someone, and even if they have a decent sized audience, they can interact with you, and it makes people feel special. In my Get Paid to Write podcast, I have a Facebook community of, 10, 11,000 people, not huge, but significant. And when I record episodes, I look for people sharing celebrations in there, and I'll say, hey, let's celebrate Kay. She just got a new client from her podcast. Or I'd say, oh, let's celebrate Sally. She just published a book, or she just got whatever. And people would post, hey, is it just me, or do you feel like a celebrity when Nick mentions you on his podcast? And this isn't like this Joe Rogan audience size podcast. It's niched, it's focused on the right people, but it allows you to build that connection with the host. And so that accessibility, you can't just go meet Oprah. You can't just go meet even someone, a newscaster, but feels more customizable because you search and you find the person that you like and the type of content that you like. You find even if it's not just topic based, you like that person's personality, their delivery, their voice, whatever it is, but they're a little bit more accessible. And I think that builds some good momentum for podcasting too.
I love telling people at the end of my show, like, hey, if you want to continue the conversation, like DM me. It's me who's going to answer, not some bot, not some team member. It's always going to be me. And I answer all of my emails from people as well, just because I want to build that relationship. But I want to move into PodFest, which is coming up in, by the time this episode comes out, it'll be a month away in January in Orlando. And, I did apply to speak, and you guys had so many applications, so many. And I would imagine that has got to be so difficult. One, to pick out the speakers, but also what does your audience, the attendees like myself, what do they want? What do they need to hear so that they're moving in the right direction? That's almost like predicting the future. Like, where is podcast going? And I mean, you had a second call for speakers for topics that I was I'm not the expert in. But when I looked at it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I kind of had a little at PodFest.
Yeah. Well, and so we had well over 600 applications, and we have about somewhere around 100 slots. So it's a significant conference. I think about 125 or so people we ended up having speak. Some of those are on, quick short talks, 6-minute talks or something like that, 6 to 10-minute talks. And then there are some on panels. So we had 80 something spots, but 600 applications. So how do we choose? How did we narrow it down? Number one, we take some of the cooks out of the kitchen, so to speak. We designated someone who would know what the left hand and the right hand are doing and who knows content. And that's Wendy. She's our event director. But Chris Kremitzos, the founder, and I were there for her to answer questions, et cetera. So we tried to concentrate there to make it simpler. Number two, we have a Facebook group. We have an email list. We have a newsletter where we get to see some of the trends and we get to hear from some of the brands in the industry. And so we are fortunate to have a whole lot of information about what's trending and what direction. And so two things that were really big this year. Number one is video. How do you make video easier? Not just technically, but also from a comfort perspective. A lot of people don't like to be on video. And then producing. What do you do with the video after you record it? And so video is something where we've seen the trends over the last few years where Apple Podcasts has gone from something like 60 to 80% of people's, the tool that people use to something like 20 or 30%, where YouTube and Spotify are now much bigger. And so we're trying to help our attendees ease into the areas where they have some tailwind. If people are already in YouTube, how do you make something that that feels natural for people to watch on YouTube and stands out on YouTube? How can you be one of the first there, even though it feels in the podcast world like everyone, quote unquote, has a podcast? The truth is, it's still just a tiny number. It's now growing, and the light is really shining on it now, which is great. And then also authorship. And so I mentioned before that I help run a publishing company, a book publishing company. But there are one thing that we hear from a lot of our podcasters, a lot of our attendees, is that they're looking to build a brand. And the podcast is one tool of building that brand. It's one tool of connecting with the audience. But there are a lot of people who won't listen to podcasts currently as willingly as they will read a book. But then once they build a relationship with you in a book, then they say, oh, I want to connect with her more. And then they start listening to the podcast, not because they're a podcast listener, because they're a fan of yours. And so we have an entire author track. So how do you turn this podcast into a book, or how do you turn your message or your method even separate from the podcast into a book? And then how do you use that book to grow your brand and grow your audience and grow your income? Not just use your book, but the podcast. How do you grow your brand, audience, and income? But video is a big piece. So we take the data, we take what our attendees are asking about, and we apply it into some cohesive structure, agenda, where everyone from independent podcasters to corporate level podcasters can benefit, can apply it, just like you did. You took those pieces and applied it. And then finally, the third one that's even bigger this year is artificial intelligence. So how do you use that wisely? How do you use AI to be more productive, to be able to do more without having to do more?
Just you talking about how do you turn your podcast into a book reminds me of one of my very first podcast guesting on somebody's show. And it was about healthcare elsewhere. That was the actual name of the podcast, about going someplace else. I mean, I live outside of Boston like you do. And, so many people think Boston's like the mecca of healthcare, but I had to take somebody across the country for care that wasn't in Boston at the time. And then I got a message from him saying, we're turning the podcast, this is like 10 years ago, into a book. He goes, and you had one of the most downloaded episodes. Wow. Do I have your permission to turn it into a chapter?
You're like, no.
And that's all he did was transcribe it. Yeah. And I just thought, what a phenomenal idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we want to help people become successful. And people who walk through the doors at PodFest, I don't say overwhelmingly, but the majority of them are independent podcasters. And what does that mean? That means they're not assigned a podcast at the office. they're starting a podcast because they're building something on their own. They're passionate about something. They have a message in their heart, a method in their head. They have a system. They have a process. They have something that they would love to be able to monetize and not need a day job. And so my collection of companies and efforts are all designed to help experts not need day jobs. And everyone's custom formula is different. Some, hey, you already have this part of it going. You already have great social media or a podcast or a book. Then here are the other, maybe some stages, some virtual stages, some in-person stages are what's next for you. Or you already have a great speaking career. Maybe you start going virtual a little bit, do some podcast guesting, do some podcasting, come to PodFest. You can learn and meet people. Or maybe you need a book or something like that. So what I love about the world that we live in now is that we have all these opportunities, and it really, they don't need permission to do it. So we have all these independent podcasters coming together once a year, and then virtually or in smaller groups throughout the year. It creates this real special, we call pod fam, of podfesters who are just there to help each other.
It really is a pod fam. And that was one of the things that I really enjoyed. I mean, again, I went the first time, but I had no idea that you just have this continuous outreach and supporting your audience all year long. And not just here, you guys also took your took PodFest to Asia.
And Colombia in September. Yeah.
So now it's a global conference.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that we're really excited. In Asia, a lot of the attendees, we were in the Philippines, a lot of the attendees, they want to work with podcasters. They want to become editors. They have their own shows. There's this great mix of people. So we're really excited about spreading out this year, next year, and then not necessarily getting smaller, but making it feel smaller, because you're not new if you're in Asia to PodFest in a year or two. You're part of the pod fam. Let's get together and talk about how we can support each other. And so, so getting 600 applications down to this cohesive and choose your own adventure, where we don't want to be everything to everybody, but we want to have a success path for everyone we know who's going to come, who might need this one lever, might need a little bit more help on the beginner track or the monetization track, or they might be looking to get more efficient with AI because they're at this tipping point where they don't necessarily have the revenue to be hiring or outsourcing everything, but they'd like to be able to do some iteration of delegation, even if that's to artificial intelligence for certain pieces of their show. And it becomes this really cool project for me, because I don't have to make all those decisions, but it becomes really cool that Wendy gets to put this puzzle together of welcoming people. What's cool about it too is we have 600 people, and I'd say about 580 of them are going to come to PodFest, whether they make it on stage or not. We just have this great, it's almost like you're going to see your friends and family speak, but these are some of the most impressive, smartest, most helpful people in the industry.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like I'm going to be a lifer now for PodFest. So I can hardly wait to see what next year will be like for my podcast. But there is also a component to showing up at in-person events. I mean, like the virtual conference, there was a space and a time where we needed it, and, to increase our learning. But there is something so wonderful about in-person events. And, like I speak a lot about this as not just an audience member and not just a speaker, but I just think that there's so many benefits to not just sitting down in the room where you're learning, but the hallways where you are meeting all of these fellow people who have the same passion as you. Could you just speak on the in-person event?
Yeah. I am so in debt to in-person events, because even small ones to large ones, have changed my life. I'm a natural introvert, which is really hard for me to get out from that instinct to just go up to my room and sort of quote unquote hide by going into extra sessions that I'm just there because I don't want to start a conversation. And so what I did was I take these events and I take an approach to them where I will make sure that I either quickly make 3 friends or go with 4 people total. And so we separate And then there'll be me and one person walking around and the other two walking around. And everyone's job is just to build relationships for the other people because we're closet introverts or we're hardcore introverts. And it's so much easier for me to say, oh, you public speaker, I have the person, I got to make an introduction for you, as opposed to, oh, you want to write a book? Let me tell you about what I do. But then you walk around and say, oh, you need a book. I should introduce you to Nick. And so the people there are, they go there with this desire to not just help themselves, but to help each other. And that's something that really, that PodFest is, I don't want to say unique because there are other conferences that do that, but uniquely focused on it. I'm in some mastermind groups, some smaller mastermind groups, but I take this mindset into these large events where you have 2,000-3,000 people there, where I walk into the room and I want everyone else to.
I just lost the audio.
Oh, you did?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear
apparently,
me?
if you stop talking, just suddenly. Hold on a second.
No problem.
Oh, this thing started acting like.
Now I lost you.
Much better.
You
take that step. Yes, that's that. Don't know what that was all about.
That's
if
okay.
you wouldn't mind repeating that, please.
Yeah, no problem. So what I
heard about about like you go with two people, like they're each act teammate. I heard about that. That's a great one, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have a course called Crushing Conferences that I haven't sold in a while, but that's like the big thing is you go with two people, you go with three people, and you're each selling each other, and it just makes it so much easier. So, did you get the whole selling each other part, and then I'll start from after that, or do you want? Okay,
so start from there. Thank you.
Okay. So, what I like to do is help people make conferences easier because conferences can be intimidating. Even if they're small 50-person conferences or 2,000-3,000 person conferences, they can be intimidating, especially for an introvert like me. And so what I do is I either make 3 friends real quickly or because then I get it out of the way and I don't have to make any friends anymore because I have these folks who are all there focused on helping each other out. And so we break off into groups of 2 and then 2 people will walk together to help each other, but you're selling each other. So if you and I were there and you were on a different team, so to speak, than me, then I would talk to someone and take that mindset that I'm going there to try to find people to help you, which makes it easier for an introvert. And they say, oh, I want to be a public speaker. Oh, I know who you need to talk to. Let me make an introduction. And you're talking to people and you say, and you hear something about a book or whatever, you need a book. Oh, you should talk to Nick. And so I end up leaving conferences. In fact, I have never left a conference since I started doing this without multiple 6 figures of leads, and many of which closed because I get the leads because other people are helping. I don't have to get out of my introvert shell. There's a second thing that I do that's super helpful too. And I would encourage everyone to do this at PodFest or any other conferences. I'm fine exchanging business cards. And at PodFest this year, I'm going to have to be because I'm working it. But when I'm an attendee and I'm walking around and I have a little bit more time flexibility there and someone says, hey, can I get your card? And it's someone that I think that we could do some great stuff together, some great business together. I'll say, yeah, here's my card. But why don't we just take out our phones and schedule a time to talk on the spot? You have your phone, I have my phone. Let's make sure the follow-up happens because I know that when I get back to my desk, I'm just going to have a stack of business cards and eventually I'll get to them. But sometimes I won't because I get back to business and life happens. So if there are people who are helping you make these connections, number 1, and then number 2, for those main connections that you think could be mutually beneficial, you just schedule on the spot and don't worry about the business cards. You can turn any conference into the beginning of something special. And so those relationships in the hallway are gold because these are people all walking around. And if you go in there with the mindset that I'm going to help every person I meet become successful, they are going to not just reciprocate because of the law of reciprocity, but they're going to reciprocate and others are going to reciprocate because you will be on their mind the whole time because you have a connection for them. Even if you have these 3 people that you're walking around with and they have your link to your calendar. Hey, you know what? You need to talk to Nick. In fact, I have his calendar. Let's just get on the calendar. Don't worry. He'll be fine with it. I'll let him know. And just get on the calendar.
I love that. That is brilliant. So for all the introverts who are listening to this and say, I don't do conferences because I'm an introvert, You just heard it from Nick about how to manage your way through PodFest or any other conference. So thank you very much for that. That was gold. Before we close, we have to talk about PodFest and when it is, where it is, and why everybody should be attending.
Well, yes. So it's January 16th to the 19th in Orlando, Florida at the Renaissance Hotel. So there's probably few places, at least in the United States, that you would want to be weather-wise than Orlando in January. So just enjoy the weather, enjoy the vitamin D, the sunshine. But you're really going to walk into a room or several rooms where literally everything you need to become successful lies. And there are a lot of people there who really want you to help find it. And sometimes you set all these goals, and around January 16th or 17th, most New Year's resolutions will fall off anyhow. I think the stats are by February 8th. And so maybe we can help you create some momentum and give you just one thing even to leave the conference with to implement that helps build that momentum and keep it simple for you. And so there's going to be a lot of great people there. It's a great place to be. The hotel is beautiful. So it's almost like a vacation. But you're going to leave more motivated, no doubt. You're going to leave inspired and hopefully with the relationships and the information to execute on whatever it is that you have for 2025.
Fantastic. And where can they go sign up, get their ticket?
Yeah, you can go to podfestexpo.com. You'll see a ticket button there. And I think if I remember correctly, we are giving your listeners a discount on their tickets, right?
I believe so. I think the code was Speak Out.
Yeah. And that'll for our creator passes. And what's one cool thing? So the little details, and I won't go too deep into this, but the little details that we're excited about this year are for the first time, we have an editor pass. As an introvert, I come in and I'm like, okay, how do we make this easier for introverts? Because I would want to make it easier for me. And Chris Krimitsos is like, well, I've been thinking about doing an editor pass. So we have creator passes, which are for content creators. And then now we have editor passes, which are for people who serve the podcasting industry. And what the purpose for that is, especially for the introverts, you're walking around, hey, that person's a creator, that person's an editor. How do you serve? It's a conversation starter. It helps the introverted editor know that you not have to start that conversation. You just know. And then we also have a VIP pass, which is really cool. We get a masseuse in the room and includes some food and some access to some additional parties. So we want to make it as enjoyable as it will be inspiring and helpful for you.
Wonderful. And I'll make sure that all those links are down below. So get your ticket. It's rapidly approaching. And if you see me or Nick, please feel free to come up to us. Well, Nick, you probably don't know this about me, but I'm at heart, I'm also an introvert. I just know when to switch it on and switch it off, when I have to be on stage or in front of people or at a conference. So make sure you come up to us and say hello and that you heard us on the podcast. That would be wonderful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you giving me this virtual stage to talk to a lot of really cool people. And that's another great part of podcasting. You can get started by being a guest on other people's and just trying to help their listeners become successful.
Wow. That was a ton of information, whether you are interested in podcasting, you have a podcast, thinking about starting another podcast. The link to join or learn more about and get your ticket to PodFest will be down below. There is a code that you can use. You Speak Out. I'll make sure all that information is in the show notes. If you are new to my podcast, please let me be your tour guide. I have a new listener guide for my podcast, and you can download that at speakandstandout.com/guide. And it literally is a guide of my most popular downloaded episodes, depending on where you are in your speaking journey, whether you are wondering if it's good for you and your business, you're just wondering how to start out, or you're wondering how to convert more of your audience every time you are on stage. You want to grab this new listener guide, speakandstandout.com/guide. And there is also a list of all of my other resources for you. That there are nice, easy links for you. along with ways that you can participate in the show, like on the speaker circle or speaker breakthrough session. So grab your new listener guide today, and I hope that you have a wonderful holiday season.